just like the captain of the Starship Enterprise, of the sequence clip that I put out on my YouTube about 4 or 5 days ago pertaining to Captain Kirk not being aware of the ship because of the changes that had been made his inexperience be crucial to the crew and the ship due to his lack of knowledge about the changes in the ship. It's the same way with the President of the United States. We have somebody that's, I hate to use the word ancient because I'm fairly old myself, pertaining to understanding the differences in today versus what used to be considered normal back years ago. But we have somebody that's in charge of being the chief and commander that does not even have a clue pertaining to modern day science and pertaining to the changes that has been made for the past 25 or 30 years in comparison to what used to be back then versus what is now. So please listen to this segment, please.
The nation are spending billions of dollars preparing for what is to come. The U.S. military, too. Billions of dollars. This is not a political issue. It's science. But some have made it political, especially Republicans. And as a result, a lot of folks have missed this report. It was dropped, as I said, ahead of schedule on Black Friday, when a lot of Americans are busy shopping, eating Thanksgiving leftovers, and spending time with the family. But it's extremely important.
I've seen it, I've read some of it, and it's fine.
Did they say economic impact is devastating?
Yeah, I don't believe it.
You don't believe it?
No, I don't believe it.
It's fine, says the president. President Trump blunt on where he stands on the findings of top scientists from 13 federal agencies. The president added that it makes no sense for the United States to take drastic steps to fight climate change when other countries like China and Japan have not done so.
So because other people are walking off into the volcano, we're supposed to walk off into the volcano too? You know, it hadn't been too many years ago, give or take about 450, maybe 500 years ago, whenever they told Columbus, sail the seven seas and go discover new lands. And somebody in the boat said, well, we can't do that. The world is flat. And other people in the boat agreed with that individual, but there was one person that said, no, the world isn't flat, the world is round. We can go all the way around the world if we want to. Because of one individual that knew the truth and the changes of the dynamics of knowledge in growing and evolving and in understanding that no, the world isn't flat, it's round. We today have discovered one of the greatest nations in the world called the America. The Americans pertaining to this great land that the Native Americans had done already discovered thousands of years before even Columbus got here. So let's listen to some more of this rhetoric in one form or another, in which the word rhetoric does not mean a lie. The word rhetoric means to be classy with your words, to be influential. The way that I understand the word rhetoric. Now, you may understand the word rhetoric, the using that terminology in a different form, but that's the way that I understand it. There's a difference in somebody using rhetoric versus propaganda. The word propaganda does mean lies. Okay? I didn't use the word propaganda. I used the word rhetoric. Let's listen to the rhetoric one way or the other towards what that they are trying to make a point at here. But the fact of the matter is, climate changes are real. It is not a hoax, folks. Even Al Gore tried to convince the people here in Tennessee, and the people here in Tennessee, rather than believe Al Gore about the extreme climate changes, they believed in the lie that the Republicans had told, which was, hey, if the Democrats get in power, they're going to go house to house, searching out people's homes towards obtaining and getting their firearms. Which would you rather believe in, the truth or a lie?
Your latest piece is titled "The World is on Fire and Trump is Playing with Matches." The president obviously dismissive of that report. When he talked about not believing it, he was speaking specifically about the economic impact that was laid out in that report.
Yeah, this is criminal, really. When you get down to it, I mean, I've followed this issue since the first Earth Summit on climate change in 1992. I was was post South America correspondent then. I covered that meeting. I have since spent more of my life than I care to admit reading these sort of dry reports from the scientists, the international scientists and the U.S. scientists about climate change, and I've watched as they become increasingly more dire, increasingly more distressed, and increasingly more certain of what's going on. And now there just isn't a question. There's no question about the science. There's no question about what's happening. The question is a political question, what we do about it, but we have a president who chooses willfully to ignore the facts all around him. And one of the things, right? For example, last week President Trump went out to visit the scene of that awful fire in California, the Paradise Fire, the Camp Fire that killed 85 people and destroyed 14,000 homes. Well, in this report, it notes that the acreage that has burned in wildfires in this country in the last, say, 3 decades or so is double what it would have been in the absence of climate change. I mean, and these figures and these calculations become less and less speculative and more concrete and real with every report. And it is tragic that we have a president who at this critical moment chooses not to be a firefighter but to be an arsonist.
Well, he also likes to rake the floor of the forest because that stops the fires as well.
Raking,
So, Noah, there are climate change deniers. But then there are people, I think what President Trump's giving voice to there, conservatives who say, I don't believe it's as man-made as some of these scientists say. I don't believe we should overhaul our economy and change our country completely based on climate change. Is that a fair assessment of where conservatives are on climate change?
I think it's fair. There's also sort of a finer distinction, but one that is necessary too, which is that a projection of specific impacts is something we should look on with skepticism, because it has been proven in the past that these projections with very specific impacts fail to meet expectations. The IPCC's 1990 report was wrong on temperatures and rates of increase. The 2001 report was wrong about snowstorms being more or less intense than normal. And just last week, we had a consensus opinion about oceanic temperatures rising being retracted, not because of the rigors of peer review, but because a skeptic with a blog observed and dissected the numbers and pointed out the errors in this collective judgment. So no, these projections, especially one that takes us literally a century out, should be looked on with some skepticism, and the president says that in a very ornery way, but he's not wrong about that skepticism.
But the idea that the temperatures are rising and the sea levels are rising is not disputable at this point. Your question is whether the long-term projections can be taken as gospel.
Correct, and the impacts that we are going to take in order to prevent the catastrophic effects. Look, we were just talking about the car market, right? The car market's being very disrupted, but one of the things they did 10 years ago was make a bad bet. They bet on rising oil prices, straight line projection into the future. That was was wrong. It turned out that making small cars did not appeal to a market in which gas prices were lowered as a result of innovation, hydraulic fracturing, and the production of oil exports and stagnant energy demand, which will make the United States a net energy exporter in 2022. No one predicted that. Betting against human innovation is a bad bet.
Coming up on Morning Joe, the Trump administration insists its policy was not to separate families for the purposes of deterring migrants from crossing the border. We'll talk about that through the lens of something Jeff Sessions said not all that long ago. Morning Joe's coming right back.
Of justice for prosecution. If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you. And that child may be separated from you as required by law. So if you're going to come to this country, come here legally. Don't come here illegally.
When we break news.
Gas is forming, and it's going to be formed, and they're running up with a child. And in some cases, you know, they're not the parents. These are people, they call them grabbers. They grab a child because they think they're going to have a certain status by having a child. You know, you have certain advantages in terms of our crazy laws that, frankly, Congress should be changing.
President Trump, among other things, inventing the term grabbers at that roundtable last night. Yesterday, also talking about the use of tear gas on migrants who tried to cross into the U.S. on Sunday. Despite what the president called a, quote, very minor form of tear gas, the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection acknowledged in an interview last night there is only one standard form used by all U.S. law enforcement. Joining us now, the co-host of Amanpour and Company on PBS and contributing editor for the women's news website Bustle, Alicia Menendez. Also with us, MSNBC correspondent Jacob Soboroff and MSNBC contributor Mike Lupica. He's out with another new book titled Robert B. Parker's Blood Feud, and quite a cover, I must say, Mike Lupica. What's going on there with the brass knuckles?
Who doesn't like brass knuckles with a good cocktail?
That's fantastic.
No, it's a great. It was. They had this cover right away, and to pick up the work of the great Robert B. Parker's been awesome.
It's a book that demands to be opened with that cover. Jacob,
I want to say something. We don't know which is saddest. Either heathens grabbing up children and using them as an umbrella to protect themselves, just like the president talked about, that we have certain policies embedded into our laws that if you fit under a certain criteria, you are more susceptible of being accepted into whatever system that you're trying to be involved in. I don't know which is sadder, towards rotten, stinking, low down, no good for nothing people trying to use children as a barrier, or use children as a shield to hide behind, versus our president that has yet to believe that the human consumption up onto this planet is having a pathetic effect upon to the ecosystem pertaining to global warming and environmental changes. I don't know which is worse. Hiding in behind children and using them as a shield, or having a chief and commander that's supposed to be in charge of all of our affairs that is still in total denial about global warming. We have reached a very, very sensitive, critical pinnacle point in not only America, but throughout the Homo sapien race, of our very own survival. And if we don't watch, I'm going to repeat this, if we don't watch, because of the stubbornness and the hard-headedness, and because of the wickedness of man, just like them using human children for a shield or an opportunity. If we don't watch, what terrifies me is God the Father, the creator of all things, bringing down more misery upon the human consumption upon this planet, similar towards what he done during the era and the reign of Sodom and Gomorrah and other cultures and other generations that failed to see the signs, that failed to open their eyes, that failed to understand that the greatest teacher of all teachers is in fact the Almighty. And whenever you stop observing and listening and paying attention to the instructions of the instructor, that's whenever everybody gets in trouble. Everybody suffers the consequences. And I hope to God that we have not reached the pinnacle point of no return, to the point that we cannot reverse this in some sort of human factor. That is the seriousness of this message going out after Thanksgiving, the golden year of the Jubilee, going out to the general public before Christmas in the year 2018 of the very facts are still being cast to the side and not observed in a proper form that they should be observed in. Even Christ said, you see the wind and it rattles the trees. And you know that whenever the wind comes from the south and it's warm, that summer is nigh. You know all these signs pertaining to, if it comes out of the north in the fall, that winter is soon to appear. If it comes out of the south in the spring, that summer is near. But yet, no, you cannot see the signs of the end of time. These are the signs that Christ told us to observe and to be sensitive towards what is happening in regard to the sorrows, the great sorrows that are befalling upon this planet right now because of the sin of man. Christ said that these great sorrows would come even as a woman giving birth in traveling with great pains, that these are the signs of being at the end. But people such as our chief and commander, the President of the United States, and other people are not paying attention to the signs. They don't see the signs. They don't understand the signs. They're in denial about the signs. And if we don't watch, we're going to wind up losing out on the very ride that even Columbus was so passionate about, towards telling the rest of his crewmen, the world is not flat. It is round. Let's go discover new countries, going where no man had gone before. Because Columbus had a strong imagination, and Columbus could recognize the signs of the ocean, the signs of people being out there for days and days and weeks and weeks and months, and picking up on testimony from this one and testimony from that one. And finally Columbus come to his own conclusion, well, the world can't be flat. Because if it was flat, how in the world could they have went from point A to point B and been out on the ocean for that length of time if the world was flat? People was honestly convinced at that time, during that time, that the world was flat. Because they could not conceive, they could not endure the changes of evolving. And if we didn't listen to someone like Columbus, I guess to this day we would have encaptivated not only desirable dreams, but technology and everything else, to the point that we would still be living back in that century, back in the 12th, the 11th, 12th, and the 13th century. We would still be living in that same century if we wasn't willing to listen to someone like Columbus and understanding, well, maybe the world isn't flat. Maybe he is onto something. Maybe he has discovered something different with his open mind in believing that the world is round. We are at a Columbus moment right now, in not only America but throughout the world, of a certain group of people still wanting to believe this way, but then there's one or two that believes, no, it's this way. We are at that Columbus discovering moment in history. Not only with our environmental changes, but with other affairs that are going on in the world as well. And I hope to God that we are smart enough and intelligent enough, just like Columbus and people like Columbus, in putting aside our doubts and putting aside the things that we don't truly have a custom of practicing or believing in, and that we will evolve and move forward and understand that the climate changes are real and that we need to make proper changes in our lifestyle and in the way that we are conducting our practices here on the earth for our own self-preservation, for survival purposes. Because once we reach that plateau, that pivotal plateau, that summit moment of the point of no return, either be it in the environmental world or the world of sin, that's whenever the Almighty brings fire and brimstone down upon a society similar to what he done during the era of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's whenever God the Father looks upon to humanity in the degree that if I can't cure them from their unlawful practices and their narrow-minded thinking, if I can't cure them from the sins that they have been accustomed to, towards getting them out of that era that they have engulfed themselves into, that if I cannot cure them, I will kill them. And it says that very, very clearly in the book of Revelations, that he will come back and destroy those who are in fact destroying the planet called Earth. So please, let's listen to some more of this as we go forward in our personal discoveries pertaining to how man is deciphering between the truth and nothing more than a pure, mere mortal lie.
But I want to start with you. You've been obviously covering the border for quite a long time right now. What do you make of the recent developments in the last couple of days?
You know, I just can't help but continue to think that what we're seeing down there now in Tijuana, on the other side of the San Ysidro port of entry, is another manufactured crisis, you know, just like this child separation. Where we don't have to have 8,000 migrants sitting in tiny shelters and now in football stadiums south of the border. You can allocate more resources to the border to process those people and get them into the United States, or at least have their asylum claims heard. Over the summer, it was the forced separation of, we thought, according to the Trump administration, 2,600 kids. Now 60 Minutes and others have said it may be as many as 5,000. They use this process called metering, which slows the whole asylum-seeking process down, basically grinds it to a halt. And they're seeing somewhere between 50 and 100 people a day. And when you had a process that was already backed up to 2,000, a DHS official showed me the data, 2,000 people were there before the so-called caravan even arrived, and then you have thousands of people arriving on top of that. It's a recipe for disaster. We know the border's not a war zone. We know it's not dangerous, but Donald Trump is manufacturing through his policies a very dangerous situation that's obviously boiling over right now.
The president's talked about this remain in Mexico policy. He says it is a policy. The Mexican government says, no, we haven't agreed to that yet, which would keep asylum seekers on the Mexican side of the border until their hearing, which in many cases, as you point out, could be years. We get sort of a preview of what that might look like with just this one group in Tijuana right now, staying in these shelters, not enough resources. Now imagine the backlog that would be there if there were remain in Mexico policy.
It's an absolute mess. And first of all, we don't know that it is a policy. The incoming administration, which doesn't start till December 1st, has denied it, even though in some news reports they had said that that actually was a policy. The bottom line is they're putting troops on the border. They're not putting immigration judges. They're not putting people to process asylum claims on the border, and that is a deliberate decision by the Trump administration. If he were to look at his own DEA statistics, the 2018 National Drug Threat Assessment came out just at the beginning of this month, and it said, this is his own DEA talking, spillover violence is not cause for concern along the southwest border. There are drug cartels, there are certainly criminals on the other side of the border. Some of the most dangerous cities in Mexico, one of the most dangerous countries in the world. But the fact is, according to Donald Trump's DEA, it doesn't come over to this other side of the border, at least in measurable and damaging levels.
I want to stop right there and weigh in again. Whenever I was working for Bill Luke Chrysler Dodge, I got to understanding a little bit of the tactics that ICE was having to go through and use towards stopping illegal immigrants from crossing over to the United States. Because from time to time, I would have to actually work on an automobile that had been used for human smuggling. At that time, ordinarily, they was getting $2,000 a head for smuggling a human body from over in Mexico over to the United States. $2,000 a head. That means if you had a big bus, similar to a van, a big van, and you could stuff 40 people in that van, that means you could get $80,000 if you could smuggle 40 people over the Rio Grande in one night. In one night. You don't think that this looks appealing to the crook and the person out there that could care less about any morals? You don't think that this looks appealing to the outlaw and appealing to people that are wanting to make quick cash? Well, sure it does. Sure it looks appealing. While I was working for Truck Works Incorporated, which is south of Phoenix, even closer to the border, I got to noticing ICE, how that they would form in multiple groups, and they would never go out by themselves. There would be 3, 5, 8, maybe 10 vans or trucks or whatever that they was driving pertaining to their squadron that they was forming that day, that they would go out in groups. That way they could protect each other's back. There's no doubt that right now we're in an invasion of people wanting to harm us and do wrong to our laws and take advantage of our privileges over here in America. This should have been observed, looked at, analyzed, and even processed in the proper form shortly after 9/11. But because everybody was pulling in different directions, and because we didn't understand the supernatural force field that is attacking the American way of life towards these various invasions, there never was a red flag raised in that degree. We still stand behind this decision that our chief and commander is making towards trying to bring awareness to Congress of changing various laws and statutes pertaining to the magnitude of the dangers involving illegal immigrants crossing over into the United States. Now, does that mean that we have changed our ideology pertaining to the wall? Not at all. Our ideology stands the same because we believe that there's just as much corruption inside the wall as it is outside the wall. And until you're willing to open your eyes and understand the corruption of mankind's soul pertaining to his heart and his mind, until you're willing to clean up the inside of the cup, you can clean the outside and scrub it all you want, but you're still going to be just as corrupt and just as lethal as you ever was before you ever started cleaning the outside of the cup. In other words, a man or a woman is just as prone of picking up a knife or a gun and committing a heinous crime called murder that's wearing a three-piece suit or a nice blouse as it is somebody out here living homeless that has holes all in their t-shirt and holes all in their pants. Sin holds no prejudicism. Wickedness holds no prejudicism. It can work just as easily in a judge as it can a construction worker. It can work just as easily in a school teacher as it does a sewing factory worker. It can work just as easily in someone working in the clergy towards being a defective priest, just as easily as it can somebody that's associated with some sort of wicked demonic occult. Sin does not have different formats of people that it works through or works with. In other words, it don't discriminate.
Jacob, how many children are still separated from their parents because of this original disastrous and incompetent policy?
Today, or as of the last report, there were 25 that were still ineligible out of the 5,000, according to this latest number, 2,600 according to the government, with about 99 who they say that the government, the parents have bailed on the kids and gone back. They've already been deported and they don't want to pick up their children. Obviously, people like the ACLU, groups like the ACLU will dispute those numbers. And you heard again, the president, by the way, saying in response to that 60 Minutes report, this was an Obama administration policy. This wasn't a deterrent. The government came out, the DHS came out and said this was never a deterrent policy. And I brought a clip because I just want to say it is so ridiculous to hear the government continue to say over and over again, this wasn't a deterrent policy. This was never designed to rip families apart. This is what Manuel Padilla, the chief of the sector, Rio Grande Valley, where the most separations occurred, told me about whether or not zero tolerance was a deterrent policy. Watch this.
Is this a deterrent? Is that the point? Are you trying to deter people from coming by separating children and their parents and prosecuting 100% of people who come here?
Yes. So the point is that we have an upward trend, right? So if we do not do anything, we are going to be in a crisis mode.
So separating parents and kids is to put consequences on them coming here together?
Yes. Yes.
And Jacob, it's not just him. The Attorney General of the United States at the time, Jeff Sessions, said explicitly that it was a deterrent.
John Kelly as well.
Kelly
John Kelly as well. I mean, so it's just it is as absurd as saying that we need to fire tear gas at women and children and parents along the border as it is to say, oh no, that was never a deterrent policy.
Alicia Menendez, do you think that this is a deliberate ploy, keeping people outside of the country as they wait to seek asylum, which is, by the way, in contravention of not just US law, but also international law? Do you think there's a sense there that if they can create enough chaos on the border, have enough images of people protesting on the border because the situation gets so fraught, so frustrated, they haven't got services, they're queuing for up to an hour for food and up to an hour to use the bathroom, that it's somehow a deliberate political ploy on the part of the administration to create these images just because they've seen in the past that this works with the base?
Absolutely. I think the Trump administration knows that as long as this debate stays locked in tough versus generous, they believe they're winning. They at least believe that they're winning with their base. And that's why you don't hear real serious discussion about what it would take to address what is happening at our border. That would mean a few things. It would mean investment in these asylum seekers' home country, continued, sustained, generous investment such that you can mitigate some of these push factors that are bringing asylum seekers here. It means refugee protections and international resettlement plans. And it means, as Jacob said, resources towards our asylum process such that you can speed this up. That's what it would sound like to have this conversation in a sane, reasonable way. But instead, we're talking about tear gassing children in diapers at our border.
He wants these pictures. You know, there's a great modern expression, crisis managers. This is crisis creating on the border. It's just what I was surprised he even answered back on 60 Minutes the other night. He liked what he saw. He wants that chaos on the border as he continues to treat these people, who so many of whom are leaving violent lives in Central America, like terrorists. There's some bad people. Yeah, like the bad 4-year-old that got tear gassed the other day.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump probably does benefit politically from those images, but I find it difficult to see how he could have similarly organized such a thing. As you said, there are 5,000 or so on this border, but only a couple hundred making that charge. That doesn't happen by accident. That's organized. And anybody who's familiar with the situation in the Palestinian territories recognizes this kind of behavior.
Once more, some of this of what they're saying may have a tendency of being true, but some of this and what they're saying may be pure mere propaganda, pure mere lies in what they're trying to discover here in their conversations. It is extraordinarily sad. The fault falls upon to the feet of the Mexican government as well as other governments in South America that has allowed for their environment to become so toxic that people are running and fleeing from that area just to seek some sort of asylum. It is extremely sad in what that we are visually, tangibly, audibly seeing and hearing right now in regard to this invasion. It's extremely sad because it's as if all of a sudden the curtain has been pulled and now everybody and their brother can see the trueness of Mexico, which we've all known for quite some times, that it's been a depleted, sick country, as well as South America. But now the curtain has been pulled to the point that now we can actually see how severe, how dire that those situations has become, to the point that people are willing to risk their very own lives just to be able to seek some sort of a better life in another area, in another country. So the shame, and I do mean shame, falls upon to the Mexican government. It falls upon to other governments down in South America, because they have allowed for this to have become so toxic, so unbelievably dangerous.
Here, it's theatrical. It's designed for international consumption. So that's the sort of thing that's organized on the ground.
So all I'm saying, though, is he created the conditions for this volatile situation to occur by metering people that are coming through the border. You don't have to slow the asylum process down to a halt, grind it to a halt, which creates this bottleneck of people, which creates resentment, which creates anger. He uses very heated rhetoric about these people who are trying to exercise their international right to seek asylum. And so, of course, he's antagonizing them. And when he said, I mean, Mike is right. He is creating the war zone that doesn't exist by putting into place all of these restrictions and conditions.
And the images that they're generating here are benefiting both sides of this equation.
Well,
not as much as they benefit him,
Noah. Point, though. It's literally a campaign talking point. Last night in Mississippi, Donald Trump said, I'm keeping you safe. I've got to keep these people out of the country, out of Mississippi, and keep you safe. He's using this politically.
By the way, it is still as sickening to me as seeing the kids in the cages, because it doesn't have to happen. And you know who it does hurt? You know who it doesn't benefit politically? The women and the children who are getting gassed with tear gas in diapers with no shoes on. It's disgusting.
Well, they're political pawns, as are the U.S. troops who are sent down to the border on a political mission for Donald Trump's electoral advantage.
This storming the barricades notion about these caravans. I'm sorry, you know, which person from the caravan is going to end up shooting up a synagogue in Pittsburgh on a Saturday morning? There's bad guys. Yeah, there's bad guys everywhere. But the idea that this is a threat to everything decent in the Republic is absurd.
Yeah, I think this is manufactured.
Well, President Trump, meanwhile, is toying with the idea of creating a new government-run worldwide television network. It's in an effort, he says, to counter CNN's overseas channel, CNN International, which is broadcast in more than 200 countries.
I'm sorry.
President Trump harped on the network in a series of tweets, writing in part, "Throughout the world, CNN has a powerful voice, portraying the United States in an unfair and false way. Something has to be done," says the president, including the possibility of the United States starting our own worldwide network to show the world the way we really are. Great. The U.S. government already has a federally funded media outlet that reaches millions of people called Voice of America. Shortly after taking office, President Trump dispatched 2 aides to look into the VOA studios, which raised concerns his administration would put its stamp on the network's broadcast arm. And the Washington Post notes that ahead of the 2016 election, speculation had swirled around the possibility of a Trump TV channel should Trump have lost his bid for the White House. Remember, when a lot of people didn't think he was going to win, they were talking about setting himself up for that. Noah, is this just the president spouting off about something that will never happen, or is it another way to go at the media?
I don't think that the White House is presently engaged in buying studio space and hiring talent to have a broadcast network aimed around the world. I do think that what you said, you know, at the end there was is pretty accurate. I think Donald Trump didn't think this was the way 2016 was going to go. It was going to go the way of him having a broader platform in media, which is where he's most comfortable. And yeah, I think he probably missed it.
I work for a public broadcaster that is funded by the British public, that broadcasts around the world, and I can tell you it is a tough time to launch a global, international news channel without a very clear source of revenue. The business model would be tricky, even for somebody who's so good at the art of
It still just takes my breath away that almost 2 years into his presidency, he lacks so much basic knowledge about the power of the U.S. government and what he wields throughout the world. He just has no idea, and it's every single day, and no capacity or curiosity to educate himself.
Imagine the hurt feelings, though, over at Fox when they read that, because all those Hannitys and Ingrams are thinking, We give and we give and we give, and now he's already got his eye on another network.
Well, Alicia, I think we don't want to dismiss it out of hand, but I think it's long shot. Is that a tough enough term on a TV network for the President of the United States?
It's a long shot, but I think that the bigger issue here is what he believes the press's role is supposed to be. I mean, we got a window into this when he said to Kim Jong-un about North Korea's...
I want to stop right there and weigh in one more time on this program. What you're actually seeing here is the full development of imagery of the power of the media. Okay? We took notice during the Vietnam War of how powerful imagery was whenever it was one of the first wars to be documented live as people's arms and legs and bodies was being blown apart, as we seen little children be burnt to death. We seen the power of the media just in its first form, going all the way back to the Vietnam era. That's the reason why so many of those soldiers, that whenever they come back here to the States, they was being spit upon and they was being disrespected, because that imagery burnt in so many people's minds to the point that they was totally against that war that was occurring pertaining to the Vietnam War. What we're interpreting here through imagery is the full effect of what it either can or cannot do in persuading people's minds and hearts towards what they're tangibly seeing and audibly hearing. The power of television and social media and other platforms out there has went beyond anything comprehensionable that has ever been designed or manufactured by the Homo sapien race since the beginning creation of the wheel. If you want us to, we will repeat that. This is what that we are seeing the effects of, that can be cataclysmic in one way as a tool that can be used in an improper way, versus a tool that can be used in a proper way of discovering the corruption or the misbehavior in either one or a whole group or even a nation towards their behavior. We are trying to adjust to all this technology by going through the archways of understanding the concept of imagery. And the concept of imagery goes beyond anything that anybody can sit and tell you about. I could tell you that the moon is made out of cheese. I could tell you that all day long, 7 days a week, 12 months out of the year, for the rest of your life. The moon's made out of cheese. The moon's made out of cheese. And it's going to go into your head, and it's going to register, and it's going to click off certain bells and whistles in your mind, and then it's going to be released out the other side, and you're going to avoid, well, this idiot thinks the moon is made out of cheese. But if we took imagery off of a NASA Hubble satellite to the point that somebody landed on the moon, took a shovel and dug into the ground and picked up a piece of the debris that the shovel had picked up and started feeding 10, 12, 20 people in this circle. And they was all sitting around rubbing their bellies, and they was saying, this planet sure does taste good. That would change probably 98 to 99% of the people who was laughing at first about the ideology of the moon being made out of cheese versus actually seeing that the moon was made out of cheese. And I'm using this as an illustration, in a metaphor. But the fact of the matter is, imagery is real. It is powerful, and it can be extremely persuasive in one form or another, and it can actually cause chaos. So whenever one is looking at one particular mother, providing that she even was a mother, she may have been a grabber. She may have just grabbed them 2 children 500 miles away. Them children may not even belong to her. But whenever we see an image of a woman fleeing with 2 children in her arms and one of them with diapers, we must be intelligent enough to understand that that is only one person with 2 children, in which I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for children, the innocent lives of children that are being used as ploys or shields for these mean, ruthless people. But we must come to realize that this imagery that we're seeing can be taken out of context. Now, if we seen that there was a whole group of mothers that had nothing but children, then that imagery would be different than looking at one particular woman with 2 children. And I'm not saying that the woman and the children aren't important, because they are. They are. They're very important. But to take things out of context, if we seen a whole group of mothers with a whole group of children running after tear gas had been dispersed into that area to the point that they was having to flee for their very lives, then that would be painting a different image of using tear gas on innocent people. So we must analyze what we're seeing in the format that we're seeing it in and put it in the right context of what is actually happening here. And I think that was one of the big problems that the American people during the Vietnam War did not understand. They didn't understand the concept and the power of imagery, the concept and the power of media. And whenever people was seeing those things and hearing those things, it was wearing on their nerves. And if we don't watch, unless you have somebody such as myself that can express to you the power of imagery, you're probably going to fall into the same set of schizophrenia as they did back 45, 50 years ago whenever the Vietnam War was going on. You must keep things in its proper context. And imagery, even the imagery of a body camera, of a cop coming onto a scene and shooting someone. You know, what has occurred 15 minutes before that cop ever got there? What was being said? How was it being said? Who was being violated? Who was actually the perpetrator that was stirring all that up to begin with? Well, the only thing that the viewer has to see is that quick little clip of the cop having to pull out his gun and fill this guy full of holes. We didn't see all that that happened before the cop ever got there, because there was not no camera there